Millions of Americans buy bottled water believing they're getting something completely different from what flows from their tap. In reality, much of that bottled water started its journey in the exact same municipal system that supplies their kitchen faucet. This isn't some conspiracy or scandal. It's simply how the bottled water industry operates under current regulations, and understanding this reality can help you make smarter choices about what you're actually purchasing. What surprises most people isn't that this is legal. It's how rarely this reality is clearly explained to consumers. Since 2016, bottled water has dominated as America's most consumed packaged beverage by volume, maintaining that position year after year. We've collectively embraced these plastic bottles as symbols of purity, convenience, and safety. But here's what most people miss. A huge portion of that bottled water, especially the purified varieties that dominate store shelves, comes from the same municipal water systems that supply our homes, schools, and offices. The Food and Drug Administration regulates bottled water as a packaged food product, not as a utility service like tap water. Under these regulations, companies can legally source water from public municipal systems, treat it using processes like reverse osmosis or distillation, and sell it as purified bottled water. No deception, no violation of rules, just a business model that operates within perfectly legal parameters. This legal framework creates a fascinating disconnect. When you pick up a bottle of water at the grocery store, you're probably not thinking about whether it originated from the Detroit water system, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, or the municipal treatment plant in Phoenix. The label tells you it's purified water, and for most consumers, that's enough information to justify the purchase. Here's where it gets interesting. The FDA requires bottled water companies to identify the type of water they're selling, whether it's purified, spring, mineral, and so on. But there's no general requirement to disclose whether the source is municipal or natural unless the source is explicitly part of the product name, like Crystal Springs Natural Water. This means two bottles from the same brand sitting next to each other on the shelf could legally originate from completely different municipal systems, and you'd have no way of knowing from the label alone. Most people don't realize this until they stop and think about how those labels actually work. This isn't an oversight and regulation, it's an intentional framework that prioritizes treatment classification over source transparency. The reasoning makes sense from a regulatory standpoint. If the water meets safety standards and undergoes appropriate treatment, the original source becomes less relevant than the final product quality. Municipal water systems themselves are heavily regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act, subject to constant monitoring and reporting requirements that ensure baseline safety. The industry's perspective on this is straightforward and, frankly, logical. The International Bottled Water Association argues that municipal sourcing doesn't diminish product value because the focus should be on what happens to the water after sourcing, not where it came from initially. Their treatment processes create consistency and improve safety profiles. From their viewpoint, bottled water primarily competes with other packaged beverages like sodas, juices, and energy drinks, not with tap water directly. And there's merit to this argument. The explosive growth of bottled water consumption has been driven by several clear consumer preferences: convenience and portability, the desire to move away from sugary beverages, perceptions of cleanliness and safety, and widespread availability at relatively affordable price points. These drivers don't necessarily require exotic sourcing to deliver value. But let's examine what's happening in the consumer's mind when they reach for that bottle. Many people assume bottled water comes from distinct protected natural sources, maybe a pristine mountain spring or an underground aquifer far from industrial contamination. They expect that consistent branding implies consistent sourcing, and that higher prices reflect fundamentally different water origins. These aren't unreasonable assumptions, but they're not guaranteed by current labeling requirements. This expectation gap matters because it affects how we think about value and choice. When you pay anywhere from 50 cents to $3 for a bottle of water, part of that premium likely reflects your belief that you're purchasing something meaningfully different from what's available for pennies per gallon from your tap. If that water actually started its journey in a municipal system, not unlike the one serving your neighborhood, the value proposition shifts significantly. The core issue here isn't safety. That's crucial to understand. Public drinking water systems in the United States operate under rigorous oversight. They're required to test for dozens of contaminants, publish annual water quality reports, and notify consumers immediately of any safety concerns. Municipal water that serves as source material for bottled water isn't inherently unsafe or inferior. The issue is transparency and whether consumers understand what they're actually buying. Consider this scenario. You're standing in a convenience store, deciding between a bottle of purified water for $2 and filling up your reusable bottle from the drinking fountain for free. Both might literally be the same water at the source level. One just underwent additional treatment and packaging. That additional treatment certainly has value, but probably not $2 worth of value for 16 ounces, especially if you understood the sourcing reality. This isn't about assigning blame or telling people what they should or shouldn't buy. It's about understanding the trade-offs that often go unnoticed. The environmental implications add another layer of complexity. Bottled water serves legitimate purposes in emergency response situations, communities with unreliable infrastructure, and rural areas without consistent access to safe drinking water. These are not trivial applications, and bottled water genuinely provides essential service in these contexts. However, the vast majority of bottled water consumption happens in communities with reliable, safe municipal water systems. This widespread reliance on single-use bottles continues raising questions about waste generation, recycling efficiency, and long-term sustainability. The irony is particularly stark when bottled water sourced from municipal systems creates plastic waste in the same communities that could access essentially the same water from their taps. The treatment processes used to create purified bottled water from municipal sources are genuinely sophisticated. Reverse osmosis, distillation, deionization, and advanced filtration can remove chlorine taste, reduce mineral content, and eliminate trace contaminants that might affect flavor or appearance. These processes create a consistent product that tastes the same whether you buy it in Maine or California, which has real commercial value. But here's what's fascinating about consumer behavior. We've created a market where the treatment process becomes more important than the source, yet we rarely understand what those treatment processes actually accomplish. Most people couldn't explain the difference between reverse osmosis and distillation, but they'll confidently choose one bottled water brand over another based on packaging and marketing messages that rarely mention treatment methods at all. The regulatory framework that allows this system reflects a broader philosophy about how we approach food and beverage oversight. The FDA treats bottled water like any other packaged product, focusing on what goes into the final container, rather than the journey that brought it there. This makes sense from a public health perspective. Standardized treatment processes are often more reliable than variable natural sources. Yet this same regulatory approach means that source changes, treatment modifications, and supply chain adjustments largely happen without consumer notification. A brand could switch from one municipal source to another, change treatment facilities, or modify processing methods without updating labels or notifying customers, as long as the final product meets regulatory standards. Understanding this system doesn't require rejecting bottled water entirely. Instead, it requires calibrating expectations about what bottled water labels do and don't guarantee. If you value the convenience, portability, and taste consistency of bottled water, those benefits remain regardless of the source. If you assumed you were paying for access to unique natural sources, that assumption might need adjustment. The path forward involves better alignment between industry practices and consumer expectations. This doesn't necessarily mean requiring detailed source disclosure on every label, but it might mean clearer communication about what different water categories actually represent. When consumers understand that purified water often means municipal water that underwent additional treatment, they can make more informed decisions about value and necessity. For families trying to navigate these choices, the key insight is simple. Much of bottled water comes from municipal sources, and that's not inherently problematic. What matters is whether you understand the system well enough to make choices that align with your priorities, budget, and values. The water itself is safe regardless of the source. The question is whether the convenience, packaging, and treatment justify the cost and environmental impact for your specific situation. This reality doesn't diminish the legitimacy of choosing bottled water when it serves your needs. In many cases, you're not paying for a different water source, you're paying for a different process. And once you understand that distinction, bottled water starts to look very different. It simply provides context for understanding what you're actually purchasing and what you're not.